Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 13, Episode 118. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us here this Monday, Steelers Nation. And it is finally draft week, the 2023 NFL Draft kicking off round one on Thursday night and then running through Friday and Saturday. Dave, Mike Tomlin, Omar holding their annual pre-draft press conference on Monday morning. That's why this episode of the podcast is coming out a bit later. We wanted to listen to that, write about that, and talk about that. And I'm glad we did because there was one very interesting thing that Tomlin and Tomlin in particular, had to say during this presser.
Yeah, as far as pre-draft press conferences go, there were some really interesting takeaways to discuss today, for sure.
All right, so we'll dive right on in. Off the top here, Mike Tomlin seems to be putting up a big for sale sign when it comes to that 32nd overall pick. I can barely count the number of times that Tomlin talked about the uniqueness of having that pick for Pittsburgh to pick the first spot in the second round. Again, that's 32nd overall. And the possibility seemed to be strongly hinting at trading that, the interest that may receive, the calls that other teams likely will place upon that. So Tomlin, not only the way that he spoke about it, but just it was like a kid at Christmas talking about what that 32nd pick could do. So really interesting comments there.
Yeah, I'd liken it to that gif of Tomlin motioning over to the sideline there. Come get it.
Right.
And yeah, you're right at the top of the show there. If there's one primary takeaway from what we heard on Monday morning, it's that they are really interested to be in the spot that they are at 32 overall and what that might attract in the way of calls. And they made sure to say several times, excuse me, during this press conference, how deep this draft class is. I think when you even start putting the pieces of the puzzle, going back and going over the Blues Clues and looking things, and specifically at the pre-draft top 30 visitor list that this team put together, it seemed to be heavy on, man, why are they bringing in so many kind of mid-round guys, and not as many guys that you would term kind of later round guys. Now, within that, the context is, well, that right now they don't have a 5th or a 6th round draft pick. So you're going to look at it as probably as many guys that are probably would qualify in those top 4 rounds. And on top of that, you do have so many picks in the top 80 there on top of it. And that's unusual for the Steelers going into a draft on top of it. But and look, I mean, they said all the right things. We're open to trading up, even in the first round, trading down, all the things that you would expect them to say. But there wasn't one thing that perked my ears up more than the feeling that I got that, hey, here's this number 32 pick, come get it, because it's for sale.
It is. And Tomlin knows what he's doing whenever he speaks to the media. The whole NFL world listens. And so he's putting those feelers out. It's not just for you and I to talk about. It's for NFL teams to hear about that, because each team has, a group of guys and their job is to kind of literally scour the internet and see what's out there in terms of visits, information, and that'll help teams gather intel so they know how to start conversations. So let me just read at least one of the quotes that Tomlin had here. And this is off the top, asked about, are you getting calls for 17? You getting calls for 32? Tomlin saying, quote, "Man, we're excited about it, man. We've been talking about it. I think the thing that we are least familiar with about it is the amount of calls that we will be or could be getting. And that's where we've spent our time, is just talking about how do we organize and how do we get prepared for the receiving of the amount of interest that pick could have, and that's a good and exciting possibility for us. So obviously, when it comes to trades, there's no guarantees, takes two to tango, all that kind of stuff. But Tomlin really seems interested in, again, the uniqueness of that pick and what it could mean about potentially trading down from 32.
And look, I've stated several times that the top of this draft class as a whole, to me, isn't overly as exciting as maybe some most recent draft classes. But I will agree with the aspect that there is depth stuff in there, and nothing. And I put this on Twitter before we got on. Probably what he said about potentially moving out of that number 32 spot, moving down and maybe acquiring some more picks there, especially in those middle rounds there. That's probably the most excited I have been about the potential of that happening throughout this pre-draft process here. And, and look, Tomlin said we've, addressed free agency and filled holes. So hopefully blah, 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 the board can come to us and we don't have to focus in. I still think this team has holes at a lot of positions. And
sure.
I mean, you can run through them. I mean, tackle's obviously a glaring hole, a future, top cornerback, a future nickel cornerback as well. Who's going to be the backup center on this team? The wide receiver room, if they could afford to address it, could use another wide receiver in there. There's even some depth, at inside linebacker, strong safety. I mean, you just start going through it. You start trying to prioritize, and yeah, they did. It's been a very, very busy offseason for them, right? I mean, but it almost felt like it had to be, right?
Yeah, I think it was expected to be busier than people thought just because you had the new GM in, you had cap space, you have a quarterback on a rookie contract, and this was still a 9-8 team last year, one that granted finished the year 7-2, but still had, a fair amount of turnover with free agency and just how young this roster was. So yeah, there was a lot to address.
All right. So and you put out an interesting scenario there to think about. And this is something that we've said for a few weeks now. If this team moves up in the first round in any way, one would think, or one could easily surmise that it would be for a tackle, either Paris Johnson or Broderick Jones, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can never, the old Tomlin phrase, never say never, but never. If they were to move up, I can't think it would be any other position except to get a tackle, whether that's Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones, or I guess maybe even Darnell Wright, considering the buzz on him. But I just can't see it being for any other position besides getting an offensive tackle.
All right. Now, what was that you threw out with going up in the first and then down from 32?
Yeah, so here's my thought, and obviously we can speculate till the cows come home, and we won't know until we know, and I don't speculate that often, but the scenario here really kind of intrigues me. We're hearing more and more buzz about the odds of Pittsburgh potentially going up. Todd McShay making reference to that in an ESPN article on Monday, and so my thought is, let's say this team goes up from 17 to, let's say, pick 11, pick 9, whatever, to get an offensive tackle, and who you want that guy to be, let's just call him Broderick Jones. I think that's the most reasonable assumption right now. So let's say they give up 17 and 49 to do that, to go to 11. You take 32 to recoup some of that draft capital that you just gave up to get Broderick Jones, to get that tackle. You take 32, you trade down, you pick up. You're not going to get pick 49 or some equivalent, obviously, but you're going to get maybe a third-round pick, a later third-round pick, or a fourth-round pick, or maybe start to bridge that gap between the fifth and sixth round. So I think those moves could be intertwined, where you go up from 17, get your guy there, and you fall back from 32, go down, 6 to 10 spots. And because this cornerback class is so deep, we've talked about that endlessly, and Tomlin Khan referred to that today, you're still going to get a good corner if you're picking at, let's say, 38 or 37 or 41 or wherever, because this corner class is just unusually strong.
Right. And I mean, that's who knows? I mean, you trying to predict this stuff, you'd go crazy here. But I mean, I think what you just laid out is plausible for sure. But if they were to move it, anywhere right now, just based on, and it's hard to put definitives on this, but if they were to make any move right now in the first 2 rounds of the draft, I would think that the probability of moving down from 32 would be slightly higher than a move up from 17.
I would say so, just based on the team's, public
context.
Comments today. Yeah. But I think those 2 moves in conjunction, and again, these things all sound good on a bumper sticker, and you and I talking about it, but You never know until you're actually there, and you may try to go up to 17, and you may get your guy, and then can't trade out of 32. That may occur. So you never try to bank on the whole story and idea coming together. But that's my thought. But I think point is, again, takes 2 to tango, no guarantees. But at this point, I would be surprised if Pittsburgh was still holding the 32nd overall pick whenever it's announced at the top of Friday night.
Yeah, that it'll definitely, whoever they pick in the first round and whatever they do, you'll move up or whatever there. We'll have a long overnight there thinking, what does it mean? Because look, I'm excited. I think about that aspect of that potentially happening. And Tomlin even laid out there, we're not quarterback shopping, early this year,
sure.
Obviously. And there might be teams for him to go that specific like that.
Mm-hmm.
Leads me to believe that just didn't come off the top of his head, and he's not one that gives a lot of info anyway, unless he wants it out there. So
right.
It has me feeling like maybe they're thinking a team will come up to 32 to get, who knows, Levis, Hooker, you name a quarterback that falls that a team might be willing to go up to get. Now, what specifically have you looked at the trade chart? I've been busy highlighting some stuff and some transcripts and all like that. If you're looking to specifically deal that 32 pick,
mm-hmm.
What does that look like?
Well, 32, and again, trade value charts can vary. There's the old Jimmy Johnson one. I think there's a new age one, but they're probably all relative in terms of value and points and distance. So pick 32 that is in the chart that I'm looking at is worth 590 points. If you wanted to say, let's say the Raiders are 38, they don't get a quarterback at 7, they want to try to trade back up, their pick is worth 520. So 70 points of separation there. So something, a deal could look like, potentially, Pittsburgh trades 32 and they get 38 from the Raiders. And let's say the Raiders have a 4th round pick. I had this mapped out earlier. Let's say pick 109. Maybe you can get a 5th and give them a 7, something like that. So hypothetically, 32 and a 7 for 38, 109, and something in the 5th round. If they have a later 5th round pick, 174, they have that. So let's just call it, something like that. 32 and a 7th for 38, 109, and 174.
That sounds too perfect. Let's erase this part of the podcast so we don't jinx it. No, I like that. That has me even more excited at this point, because they need a good draft overall, obviously, but that long wait after the 4th round, just feels too long. They have to do so. It feels like it would behoove them, if possible, to fill that gap there.
Yeah, we've talked about this for weeks and almost months. I don't think that Omar Khan in his first time as Steelers GM first draft is going to sit on his hands from that 4th round pick all the way to the 7th round pick, which is even a bit later after the Robinson deal. It's like 241 is their 7th round pick, their first selection there. So I just can't see him waiting that long. So in this scenario, you get 2 4th round picks, you get a 5th round pick to begin to bridge that gap, to go down just a handful of spots. And again, you want a cornerback. It's going to be a good cornerback at, say, 38, as there will be at 32. Here's my only concern, at least with the hypothesis that Tomlin had about, the quarterback shoppers. Will a quarterback be there? I'm pretty confident the top 4 quarterbacks in Young and Stroud, Richardson, and Levis are going to be gone before Pittsburgh is even on the clock at 17, at least assuming if they stay there. And then the question becomes, what happens with Hendon Hooker from Tennessee? Will he be a first-round guy? That buzz has been increasing. My guess as of today, and it's a guess, no one knows for sure, is I think Hooker goes in the 1st round. Maybe a team even trades up into the back end of the 1st round to get Hooker, as opposed to trading up at pick 32 in the 2nd round with Pittsburgh. And if Hooker's gone, then there is no quarterback there, and there are no shoppers for that position.
Yeah, but who knows what what might interest another team to jump another team to come up to 32, though. It is an intriguing position overall, and you would think that it would be tied to the quarterback, but it could obviously be tied to wide receiver or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, someone's going to fall from round one. Yeah,
right.
But from the quarterback aspect, which would be the most attractive thing, like if Hendon Hooker falls out of the top 31, if he's sitting there at the start of round 2, you can put good money on Pittsburgh not having that pick, because some team will come up, whether it's the Seahawks, the Raiders, the Titans. Somebody's going to make that move for Hendon Hooker if he falls out around 1. So if you're a Steelers fan, you should very much strongly be rooting for Hooker to not be a first-round pick if you want Pittsburgh to come out of that 32 spot. If Hooker's gone, again, that possibility's there for whoever, whatever receiver, whatever player you want to put in that position, but it probably would lessen the odds because there might be less competition for teams trying to go up there and get that guy for a receiver, as opposed to if it was that last quarterback before you have your massive drop-off in the class.
And just to reiterate to everybody, if you're just joining us or haven't listened throughout the offseason or whatnot, that number 32 pick that the Steelers own is technically a second-round pick. So there's no fifth-year option that comes with that. So you're not losing that aspect if you trade that pick away, but additionally no team is gaining that if they were to trade for that spot. It is technically a second round pick.
Right. And I think that's another reason why it may complicate the quarterback process. I know I've said in the past 5th-year options aren't the say-all end-all, but when it comes to a quarterback, I think it's different. And if teams want to go get that guy, they probably want that 5th-year option as an extra attachment to it. So I wouldn't like the odds right now of Hooker being there, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Okay. Anything else kind of tied? Look, will this draft class of the Steelers include like 10, 11 players? Probably not. Should it include more than 7? I think so.
I agree.
8 or 9 sure sounds enticing. At a minimum, regardless if they move around, I still think this Steelers team comes out of this draft with 7 selections, and probably more realistically, we might be looking at 8. I think is in my head now.
That's a good number to put to it. Let me get your thoughts on, and again, I know that nobody knows, and we can sit here, we can talk all day, and we'll just have to wait till Thursday, but what is your feeling on this team trading up for 17? Is this smoke? Is this just, as Con talked about, teams fishing for information? Every team talks to everybody to kind of get a feel for where things at before things get crazy Thursday night. Do you think that's a real possibility, or do you think this team's going to probably just sit at 17?
Well, I mean, obviously it depends on what the compensation is, what the cost is, and all like that. Personally, the one player I could see them moving up, to go get would be Paris Johnson for me.
Okay.
Others might say, well, you need to put Broderick Jones in there. I'm not so much high on that aspect as I am Paris Johnson. And even then, I'm not enthralled with this tackle class, period.
I get that. That's fair.
From top to bottom. So while I'm not going to rule out the possibility of them going up to get a tackle, I certainly think the likelihood is there just from the kind of the smoke that you're hearing, but you kind of hear this smoke every year anyway. If they did move up, I would think that it would be for a tackle, and probably specifically Paris Johnson.
The question there is, how high will Johnson go? There's even rumors, and we're in silly season right now, and so you take it all with a grain of salt, but, Johnson could even go 3rd overall to the Cardinals if they can't trade out of that spot for somebody who wants a quarterback. So Johnson is going to likely command that higher draft pick overall. I think at the very least for Pittsburgh, if they want to tackle and if they're going to trade up, I have to assume that's what they're targeting. They got to jump the Jets at 13 because the Jets are a very tackle-needy team right now. Mekhi Becton did not work out. They got a big hole at left tackle to protect, presumably, Aaron Rodgers whenever that deal becomes official. And so
I think there's a few teams in that top 16 that you'd have to make sure to get a hold of. And I think the team right ahead of them, Washington's another team that could potentially use a left tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. They do. They have similar needs to Pittsburgh. Corner tackle is kind of where they're looking at right now. So, do you go to Tennessee at 11? But the Titans might want to go up for a quarterback. Do they want to trade back? I'm not sure. The Bears at 9. That's a possibility as well. So
are you excited about the possibility of them going up to, do you feel yourself hoping that they go up to get a Paris Johnson or a Broderick Jones? Let me phrase it that way.
I guess I'm a little mixed on it, and maybe that's enough of an answer to give right there. I think 17 is a very awkward spot for this team to be in potentially, where the board's going to really kind of put them in a not great situation.
And we saw that right from, and not that it means anything in the grand scheme of things, but you go back to that walk the mock that you did, kind of in a precarious situation there. And how many times have we said, man, I like that guy more at 32 than I do at 17 for the Steelers, kind of situation there. Look, I mean, I will say this. I'm not as enthralled about them moving up to get a Paris Johnson or a Broderick Jones. But on the flip side, as I've said several times in the past, if you have conviction to go up to get a guy that you really want, then how can you take issue with that until 4 years after the fact, if he busts out or anything, Sure, you can't begrudge a team. You can't begrudge them for doing that. I think in my heart of hearts, I'm silently hoping that they don't go up, period. But if they do, at least it shows conviction in them doing that. I'm just not enthralled with this tackle class.
I get that. That's fair.
And if you go up, it feels like it would be to get a tackle.
It would be. But the thing is, this tackle class is not deep. Tackle classes are rarely ever deep, where you have talent in the second, third round the way you have at a cornerback. And so if you want to tackle, like if you want somebody that can start over Dan Moore or really challenge him at the very least in year number 1, you got to get that guy early, like at the latest pick 32, if you get an Anton Harrison there. After that, they're not going to get a guy. At that point, they're looking at backup. They're looking at swing guys. It's nobody who's going to probably seriously challenge Dan Moore or Chukwuma Okorafor, although Okorafor is going to likely still start based on the contract. So if you want to tackle, you got to get him early, and you probably have to be aggressive about it. And I do like the tools and athleticism and length that a Broderick Jones has. Of course, Paris Johnson, a similar conversation probably. They both have refinement in their game needed because they're effectively 1-year starters. They're still pretty young guys. Darnell Wright's the one I wonder about. Would you make a smaller move to try to go get him if you really like the guy? I've been trying to
personally, I wouldn't, and I still and one of the things that I struggle the most with Wright is, do they have confidence that he can play on the left side or not? And if not, what is that? And we've talked about it. What does it look like if you got a guy that probably best fits at the right tackle spot? What does it look like if you draft that guy early and expect to get him on the field? Are you moving Chukwuma Okorafor over, or are you letting the young kid take try to get in there at left tackle?
Yeah, or do they have confidence in Okorafor flipping back to left tackle? If they have confidence in that, then it might make the right tackle discussion easier. I imagine they'd probably do it that way to start, with Wright at right tackle and Okorafor flipping over to left tackle. Dan Moore becomes the swing guy. But you're right, it is a messier equation. I've been trying to do a lot of research on Broderick Jones and Darnell Wright, just to learn their backgrounds more. I think they're both really interesting guys because they're both so young, but they're different. They're both 21 years old. Jones is a 1-year starter. Darnell Wright has 42 starts at 21 years old. Really interesting, I think, background there. This is a guy that has not played a ton of football relative to other guys, not only because he's 21, does have that experience, but he was not playing offensive tackle until high school. He was playing in youth football. He was a linebacker. He didn't play in middle school. And so he's kind of a guy that you see him play his best football this past year at right tackle. Some people say, well, that's because he's a right tackle. It may be, but it also may be just because he's a young guy that is naturally growing and getting better. And it's not always a linear thing in terms of your growth. You get better by leaps and bounds at certain points because you're young and you're still kind of new to the position. You weren't playing tackle since you were a little kid. So he's a really interesting guy. Broderick Jones, interesting as well, based on just the athleticism, the profile, being 21 years old, all the tools and traits are kind of there. I think Wright's a really good system fit for what Pat Meyer wants in terms of first significant contact, the heavy hands, the punch. Jones a little less so, but Jones has that real top-end athleticism that Pittsburgh's not really had a tackle. Has a similar body type to Dan Moore, but probably a little bit leaner and longer. And so I think both guys are really interesting guys when you look at their background and kind of what they're about.
Okay.
So all that is not really to say much of anything, I suppose, in terms of a conclusion. I just was kind of researching. But they like Broderick Jones likes motorbikes and that kind of stuff. He likes snakes and just like quirky stuff like that. I kind of appreciate. Darnell Wright's really into science and reading. So just kind of learning about who these guys are and kind of what makes them tick. So all that, again, is to not really have a particular point to this, but to the overall thought of, I am kind of feeling this team has a good chance to trade up from 17, go get a tackle, take that 32nd pick, trade back, 5 to 10 spots and get a cornerback.
All right.
What else from Tomlin and Khan? I think, again, that was kind of the headline-y thing. Everything else was a bit more standard, saying some words, not saying a lot of information, but what else kind of stuck out to you, Dave?
Let's see here. Let's go through some of it quickly here. I thought the comments about DeMarvin Leal can continue to keep that mud kind of or that water kind of muddied up here. One of the major components of talent, he says there's a lot of variables in determining that when talking about what his role is or definitive structure, his level of readiness, his growth and development. I'm open and expect him to be on another level like I do with all guys, but I don't know that I see it with great clarity as I sit here today. There's still too many moving pieces. One of the major components of talent acquisition remains to be done this offseason, be it in the draft or remaining free agency and things of that nature. But make no mistake, he showed some things, particularly over the latter part of last year. It's reasonable to expect him to build, but no definitive structure to it as we sit here today. That in and of itself is a little bit concerning.
That's a real, what does it mean?
Yeah, I mean, what do we do with this square peg?
Where's the round hole or the square hole, I guess? Yeah, here's my interpretation of that is, right now, it's like Schrodinger's Leal, where it could be anything. He's both a defensive lineman and an edge guy at the same time. And based on what they end up drafting, will basically determine what Leal's role is. If they get an edge early, let's just say, Felix Anaduke-Uzama in the second round, then Leal probably becomes an interior guy again. If they don't do that, if they draft defensive line, they don't really get much at edge, then Leal probably stays more as the stand-up, versatile type of guy. So basically, Tomlin seems to be saying is, that's to be determined based off of what moves we make or don't make in the draft.
Did they tell them in the exit meetings, just hold your weight right where we are until we tell you to go up or down?
That's my terrible take today. If I could ask them one question, it'd be, what is DeMarvin Leal's weight? Can we get a scale in here, guys? Can we put you on a scale, DeMarvin? I just want to know what your weight is at today, just to get an idea for what they're thinking, but it seems like they don't really know.
And haven't we said this all offseason? Well, and why we wanted Joe Clark to ask that question during the combine?
Yeah, exactly.
And then now and look, I mean, Mike Tomlin went into talking about, NFL players being, or teams being, positions being more specialized and that kind of thing. And then obviously we had to talk about the Lucas Van Ness and the Keon Whites, right? But why would you? It still doesn't make sense for me why you'd want to go with another tweener unless you're really just your game plan is to play the mix and match game.
Yeah, my thoughts on this. I think he's best in the role that he held as a rookie, where he's going to play as that big edge on early downs, be able to work inside, sub-package interior rusher on third down. I don't think he's got the anchor and the strength to be that every down run defender in the way that Cam Hayward is and, Larry Ogunjobi can be. So that's my preference, but it seems like it'll truly be dependent on how the draft looks.
And I don't know how you can't come away with that with having an uneasy feel, or at least, it creates more questions.
It does. It kind of leaves everything open. So, I mean, it's kind of a positionless approach right now. It's until they get more clarity. And so I really think it's going to come down to, depending on what they can draft, if they can go sign a veteran edge guy, perhaps, But at some point, the team's going to have to make a call and say, DeMarvin, this is what you are. So he knows, so he can be the best player that he can be. And so that's going to be an issue for him. I'm a little worried it's almost going to be a Sean Davis 2.0 with a good athlete, but you just kept messing around with his position and where he would play and what his role was. You never let this guy kind of settle into at least an idea, knowing what his role is, even if that role is going to be a versatile guy. If you don't really know that, it's hard to know your weight, how to train, how to study, what to work on, technique wise. And if you don't do those things early, it's going to really hamper development.
And he can't go work with Chuck Wright, right?
Yeah, he's in Baltimore now, unless he's getting traded or something. And Leal is not like, Leal's a pretty raw guy. Like, he's a good athlete. He's a big lump of clay, but he's not like this refined guy that can just kind of bounce between positions. He's got to work on stuff. And so with that, unless he knows what he's got to work on, it's really going to hurt him because he's a guy that has a long ways to go.
All right. What else do we want to talk about here? How about we're not taking a quarterback? I know you want to weigh in heavily on this.
Well, I can just see that getting misinterpreted in the sense of they're not going to take a quarterback at any pick. And I'm pretty sure Omar Khan was saying that in reference to we're not taking a quarterback early, which is the most obvious, statement that he could make. I think there's still a chance they could take a quarterback late. They brought in a couple guys, Clayton Tune, Jaron Hall. I just want to make sure that I'll see the headlines now. Omar says we're not taking a quarterback. They're not going to take a quarterback at all. We don't know that. We just know they're obviously not taking a quarterback, anywhere between rounds 1 through 4.
All right. So 6 or 7 still a possibility in your eyes.
I think so. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I mean, if they did take one, that's when I would expect one. Hopefully they don't do it until the 7th round is my thought. But I mean, if this quarterback class, once you get past the top of it anyway, to me, and I haven't done a lot of work on the class overall period and because I don't have to, but if there's, I don't view it being, one of these 5 guys in the 6th or 7th round would be fine by us. I think they would define 1, maybe 2 guys that they deem draftable in that 6th or 7th round. And then that's where they would attack. One of 2 guys there, and I'm with you. I think there's probably a likelihood that an XFL or USFL quarterback comes in to be number 4.
Yeah, I think the best way to do it is
3 or 4 or whatever.
Right, XFL guy, because their season's about to wrap up here. Ben DiNucci, AJ McCarron. I don't care who you pick somebody, and then an undrafted guy's ideal. If quarterback was truly off the board for a draft pick, they would not have brought in Tune and Hall for visits. They just wouldn't have wasted their time doing that. So I think that's why quarterback is still on the board late, but obviously not early.
It feels like Tune would have to be taken in the 6th, I think. Feels like.
Yeah, I think that Tune and Hall may not get there. Quarterbacks tend to fall, but I still think for them to get to the late 7th is going to be potentially pushing it. I think Hall could slip. He's a bit older, a bit shorter. I think Tune's probably off the board before 241.
Okay. Omar Khan saying pre-draft process probably 85% similar. Wonder how he pulled that number out of his hat. It was pretty specific right there. That's like me saying roughly and then giving you an exact
to the penny
exact penny number on the cap. Probably 85% similar to how the pre-draft process was under Kevin Colbert. That sounds generally correct. And we'll see obviously what the rest of it looks like. There's still the end game of this thing to consider, and then matching up the coaches going out and the visits and that kind of thing.
The follow-up question I was dying for somebody to ask, not that I would expect a specific answer from Khan, is, all right, so what's the other 15%? What's different? Mm-hmm. And again, I know that Khan will not walk you through it and tell you publicly, but I want to know what that 15% is. Can we see it? Can we measure it? Can we feel it? We'll start to find out come this weekend, but I want to know what that 15% is.
All right. He talked about obviously the acquisition of Allen Robinson II via the trade. I guess that's last week now that happened, and saying put him through the physical and all, and that was a component of it that they liked. The doctors liked what they saw. Within all that, I think they made. I think one definitive or near definitive that we can take away is they're not going to push him or Cole Holcomb hard at all, if any, during the OTA practices, because both those guys, it was a foot injury too with Cole Holcomb, was it not?
Correct. Both foot injuries.
So those guys, I would expect to hear very little about, if any, participation with those guys, because he likened it to what they did with Larry Ogunjobi last offseason there. So those guys, obviously, having experience and all like that, they're probably going to take them real easy on them during the spring practices. Mike Tomlin on the backside of that would not give any kind of health update on a guy like Calvin Austin the third, or who was the other guy who was asked about? Was it Anthony Miller? I guess with the
I think so,
with the shoulder there. So, but I mean, overall, it feels like, other than these two newcomers and potentially Calvin Austin the third, barring something happen, because even Freiermuth with that knee of his late last season, he should be good. One would think that he should be good to go. It feels like there's nobody really under contract at this moment that we're too overly concerned about not being ready for the start of training camp.
I know they're veterans, and I get the conservative approach, and I'm with you. I would not expect Holcomb or Robinson to do much, if at all, during OTAs, but it is kind of a concern. You got new guys coming in. You want them to pick up the system. Holcomb's supposed to be your 3-down backer, your signal caller, to have that guy presumably not be on the field until training camp. And if they go the full Ogunjobi approach, then you might, be eased in that first week or so of training camp. And so just a couple of guys older, coming off foot injuries, missing some time in the spring, valuable time with their new team. It's the smart, pragmatic approach, but there's a consequence to that I don't particularly love.
And look, they even said, the process last year with Larry Ogunjobi kind of hindered him a bit, right?
Right, exactly. Now, his injury did come later. It was in the playoffs, I think. And so there was less time to recover than Holcomb and Robinson that were more mid-year. So they have an extra, month or two. So that's good. But you just don't love that kind of stuff. When the first thing you talk about when trading for Robinson is, all right, let's start with the medical. Like, that's not a good conversation that I want to be excited about the guy, the player. And we're talking about, that he's healthy. It's, I don't love the way that starts off.
All right. They also talked about, and really giving us more validity to all the talk that we do every offseason about circling back to guys that they had previous pre-draft interest in. And that's why it's very important to make sure you bookmark on SteelersDepot.com annually the pre-draft visitors list, and maybe some of guys who it gets reported that maybe they spent some time with, and they talked about that today with, Allen Robinson going back all those years ago and spending all that time with him in the pre-draft process. And the Landon Roberts story was great about going to that Houston Pro Day. That was was a William Jackson Pro Day too, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
And talking to his parents in the parking lot, I think was the example given. So it further confirms the fact that these are guys that they liked way back in the process and obviously didn't draft. And now all these years later, there's a reason why these guys are in Pittsburgh now as unrestricted free agent signings.
It's the rare situation.
Or trade acquisitions.
Right. And the benefit where you have the same head coach that saw you when you were coming out, followed you through your career, could dust off the old file on you from your college days, and it helps you bring those guys in whenever they become available through free agency or trade, whatever the avenue is. So, yeah, it's one thing that makes Tomlin pretty unique.
All right. What else from Khan and Tomlin?
I know that Tomlin downplayed the whole connection with Joey Porter Jr., and I think Porter Jr. was on the All Things Covered podcast with Brian McFadden and Patrick Peterson, detailing that conversation with Tomlin. And Tomlin essentially saying this morning that, this is not new with Porter. He's known guys in the past, and so it's not really anything to make out of. But that was the comment there, and we'll see if Porter's the pick. I think the further we go along here, I think Porter's odds of being at 17 have increased in my mind over this draft process. I think the odds that Pittsburgh takes them has actually decreased over time. And I will go as far to say that if the choice was between Deonte Banks or Joey Porter Jr. at 17, I think they take Deonte Banks.
Well, that goes back to you got to mix in all of what you hear throughout this pre-draft process and then disseminate what you think is real,
right?
And what is fabricated and what is just talk and all like that. You go back to Jason Lockenfor, of all people, I think was the one that says they really love Deonte Banks. And there is obviously some familiarity there, right? From the whole Maryland thing and Dino and it's not like they don't know who Deonte Banks is at this point, even though they didn't go to the pro day. And obviously Con and Tomlin didn't make the Penn State pro day either, but everybody else did. And then you could throw, I guess, a counter argument to that would be, well, why wasn't anybody else really at the Maryland pro day? But you could counter back at that saying, well, maybe they knew Deonte Banks wasn't going to do anything there anyway.
Right. Which he did not. He did not work out.
So why spend maybe they said, hey, Deonte, you going to do anything at your pro day? No? Okay. Saved us some airfare for Grady and or Terrell Austin there within that. I mean, they know who Deonte Banks is, and just in case they didn't have enough on him, they brought him in for a pre-draft visit along with Joey Porter, who's a local visit as well too. So personally, I would rank Banks ahead of Porter on my list. If we're talking about ranking these guys
in terms of like your personal feelings and thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay. Who do you think they would take if both were there? If you had to choose,
that's a great question. That's
one of the two.
That's something that I may or may not be struggling with right now.
Okay, I don't want to give anything away, but yeah, there's familiarity with Banks, not to the degree of Porter, obviously. I think with Maryland, yeah, I mean the Dino Tomlin thing a little bit, although Tomlin had the quip of "I don't go to my son for anything" in terms of information, professional about draft stuff. But it's really, to me, the connection with Mike Locksley, the head coach at Maryland, because Tomlin and Locksley are very, very close, and so you get the intel that way. I think that's where actually the Maryland connection comes from as much as anything. But yeah, just kind of my gut. And maybe this is a little me just speculating and over my skis here. While obviously, Tomlin loves the bloodlines and dads who played in the NFL. To me, a thought that I have is that, Tomlin wouldn't draft Porter because he'll be in his dad's shadow and right back home. And that's just a lot of pressure. And there's kind of some baggage, not in always a bad way.
And I bring that up at one point during some podcast, the association with Joey and senior and all like that. How, if that adds any cloudiness to this at all?
Yeah, I remember you referencing that to some degree, but
it's a huge obstacle. And Joey Porter Jr. in that interview with McFadden basically said that when he came in, they want to talk about business and not the link,
Sure, there'd be business to do, but you still couldn't escape that kind of stuff. And so I just kind of think that Tomlin would let Porter be his own man somewhere else. I think players have said that before. Like when you go back home, you get drafted in your local. For some guys it works in Porter, there's no character concerns there. But for some guys, you just want to go do your own thing.
Well, you go back to the whole supposed conversation with Dan Marino, right?
Oh yeah, was it the conversation there with that? I forget the whole background.
If you believe and read some of the stories, they kind of thought that maybe Dan Marino would be better served to get out of Pittsburgh.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, so kind of a similar idea there. But
that was way before your time, and I mean, but it's just enthralling to look back at what was that 30 for 30 that they did on that draft, and
the 83 draft.
Yeah, the 83 draft, and I think some of one or two of those stories are even in there.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, obviously, remember the year they passed on in, they take Gabe Rivera, Senor Sack, he gets in a car accident, that whole story there, and is followed through. But
not saying what happened all those years ago has any relevance to now, but it just, trying to
illustrate the point.
Illustrate the point. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just my thought, my gut right now. I still think, tackle's got a good chance.
It still feels like if they stay at 17, it's 1 of 3 players, though, right? 4 players, 3 or 4 players.
I'm down to 1 of 4. Yeah. Who are the 4 that you're thinking of?
It feels like it's going to be either Joey Porter, Deonte Banks, Wright, Darnell, and really, I mean, I've kind of eliminated Brzee from that a little bit, but
I put Broderick Jones as that fourth if he gets there to 17, which I think is still possible. So I'm down to basically Jones versus Wright versus Banks versus a bit more distantly Porter.
Okay.
That's my thought.
And that's kind of where we've been for a little while. It's just hard trying to figure out which one it might, which one. Yeah, exactly. I wish they would have just told us today. Would
have been nice. And my final mock draft will come out Tuesday morning, and I still have I was at 2:00 last night scrolling down, like scribbling down mock draft ideas because I just don't know which way to go right now.
I've been doing the same, and I don't know. And then obviously now, do you want to include some sort of trade in your mock? Which I never do.
I want to, but I'm not because I never do. It's just impossible to predict. But there's going to be a trade that occurs in this draft that will wreck all of our mock drafts.
Sure. And in other words, rest assured, if you're worried about either one of us having a perfect mock draft, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. For the how many straight years is that? All the years I've been doing it, never gotten one.
And right. I'll never come close to equaling what I did that many years ago when I had them in the wrong order, but had I think the first 4 picks or whatnot. That's just lightning striking.
I just want to get a 7th round pick because for the last 2 years I've gotten Pittsburgh last pick correct with Presley Harvin and Chris Oladokun. Mm-hmm. So I want to keep the 7th round streak alive, but it's going to probably be harder this year. But anyway, so back to Tomlin and Kahn. Those were kind of all, I think, the big things that those guys had to say. I mean, there were some smaller things in there about, vetting character concerns and that kind of stuff. But to me, really, the only big takeaway that I have here is how open they are to dealing pick 32 and trading down specifically.
I think that's the biggest takeaway out of all this. That and the sort of definitive that Allen Robinson and Cole Holcomb are going to move very slow throughout the offseason.
Yeah, and you're right about the Leal comments being interesting. Although it's not an answer, it's just still the lack of an answer, but that's still an answer in itself, I guess.
I view that more as an eyebrow raiser than anything. A continuation of kind of what we've talked about all off season with what is the plan with him.
Right. All right, Dave, for the second half of the podcast here, I want to kind of break down just one last review of the entire 2023 NFL draft class to get our final thoughts out there. Today, I want to do the offense, and then for Wednesday's show, we'll talk about our final mock drafts and do the defense. So I just want to kind of go through things position group by position group just to get your thoughts, even if it's not all guys that Pittsburgh will be interested in taking or ultimately select. But just starting at the quarterback class, again, I know that for Pittsburgh, obviously nothing to the level of the discussion that we had last year. Potentially a late round quarterback. Do you have any, I'm sure neither of us have really studied it in depth the way that we did last year.
I haven't, no.
What are your thoughts on the quarterback class at the top? Like just gut feelings on Stroud, Young, Richardson, Levis. Do you have a favorite there? Or do you really just kind of feel like, it could be any of those guys?
It's been interesting to hear all this talk about those I guess mental kind of tests and all like that. And I haven't, dove too great into great detail of that. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I'm concerned about Bryce Young's size. That's the only thing that I'm concerned about with him is his size. I think the most intriguing out of all these guys is Anthony Richardson at the top of the class. That guy I think has a potential to maybe be something really special that we're talking about in years from now. But he is the most intriguing, I would say, overall. Bless me.
Bless you.
I should have hit my kill button. I couldn't get to it.
No, you're fine. Yeah, I'm with you on Richardson.
I haven't spent as much time on this class overall, though, to have definitive kind of feelings about him. Personally, I think if I was at the top of the class, I would take Stroud, but that's because of my bias against Young.
Okay, fair enough. I've always been the Bryce Young guy. I think he'll be the number one guy in this class. I think he'll be the first overall pick to Carolina. I know that the size is a concern, but everything else is not a concern in the least. And if you make it in the SEC at that size, behind that big offensive line, you'll make it in the NFL. So my loose list is like Young, Richardson. I don't think he's quite as raw as some people think. Stroud, and then Levis. But I'm not going to pretend like I've done a lot of homework on really any of those guys to really dive into their play.
And the Hendon Hooker conversation that we had earlier, I that's going to be interesting to watch play out.
Yeah, I think it'll be a
because of his injury and all like that, and what he's got on tape so far versus what his ceiling might be. But beyond that, there's some interesting guys that I think could be, number two potentially down the line for some teams.
Right. I think Hooker's got talent. There's the injury, the age, and kind of the college system that he's coming from. That's going to be an issue for him. But I do like Hooker, and I think he will end up going in the first round. In terms of later round guys, I'm trying to figure out who the 7th round quarterbacks could be for Pittsburgh, what quarterbacks may fall. I'm looking at some numbers right now. The average is 11 quarterbacks per year get drafted over the last, 5 draft classes. So, does a Tune, does a Hall, somebody like that fall to Pittsburgh? We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I like Max Duggan's character and all, but he might not end up being anything more than a number 3.
Yeah, I didn't put a draftable grade on him. The character's off the charts. Like, dude's super tough, but he's had so many injuries. He's small, pretty erratic, so would not draft him. Undrafted, he could come in the camp that way.
Okay.
Any other quarterbacks? Or you kind of, there's names, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I could see Pittsburgh having interest in him. I think Aiden O'Connell is going to be a good backup for a long time. Stetson Bennett is going to be, conversations about him undrafted, but the quarterback class, not great after the fall off.
Agreed.
All right, let's go to running back, another position that obviously the Steelers aren't going to show a lot of interest in, although really there's like 2 running backs on this roster, right? There are literally more in McFarland and Teague and others, but, do you add a running back if you can't sign a Benny Snell after the draft? So, where does Bijan Robinson go? Is he, considered one of the better talents in this class, but he's playing the running back position. So any feeling on where Robinson may end up?
If a team's going to draft a running back in the first round this year, it's him. And boy, people have been all over the chart with him, right? Thinking he could even go in the top, 5 or 10. I think he will end up being a first round draft pick. I think a team, heck, even the Eagles with their first pick. They don't lack a lot on that roster right now, right?
Yeah, the Eagles at 10 certainly could get Robinson. They let Miles Sanders hit for agency, so I think that certainly makes a lot of sense.
Bandicana is going to be in wherever he lands. Going to be interesting to watch because of the ability to break the big play, and you know how I am about running backs and their ability to provide explosive plays. And you've obviously talked about Roschon Johnson quite a bit through this draft process. Going to be interesting to see what happens with him. Evan Hall's a very try-hard type player. If you were into later rounds and you needed a guy that can do a lot of things for you, that guy's full of heart, man, and full of effort. He's a heart, smarts, effort kind of guy. So I really liked him. He was was he Senior Bowl or Shrine Bowl? I can't remember. I think he was one of the two there, but he is somebody that I've watched a little bit throughout this pre-draft process. But the notable ones that have had my attention, I think Jamar Gibbs is an interesting talk out of Alabama. But to me, the guys that I've watched have been Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, a little bit of Roschon, obviously from him playing at Pitt, Israel Abandakanda, and then Hall, which is much later.
Yeah, that's probably more information than I even have on the running backs. I did watch a lot of Roschon Johnson. I think he'll be a really good pro, literally a 4-down kind of guy because he's going to excel on special teams. I know that Joe C. really likes Dwayne McBride from UAB, big bruiser, break tackle kind of guy. Has not caught like 2 career passes and some fumble issues to talk about there. Keaton Mitchell, guy that can work in space, speedster. From there, I think it's a pretty average running back class overall.
Right.
Let's see where to go to next. Tight ends, your favorite topic. Really strong tight end class, Dave, top to bottom. Probably one of the best tight end classes we've seen in over a decade.
Yeah, it's going to be. We've done enough talking about Darnell Washington already, and what literally a monster he is. And you're talking about a 6th tackle there that can actually do stuff with the football in his hands as well too. So, I mean, if you're talking about any kind of team that has kind of a luxury to go for that kind of player, second round or whatnot, I mean, he's hard to miss.
Right.
It goes without saying. As far as the Steelers specifically, I have focused more on, as we've talked several times, the kind of guys that could serve as a number 2 for the Steelers. So, I think you get into the Luke Schoonmakers, Zach Kuntz is somebody we've talked about a little bit. Going back to the Senior Bowl, that Josh Weil, kind of a 5th round or later guy out of Cincinnati could be potentially a nice number 2 tight end for team. Payne Durham, I think, is another one out of Purdue that could potentially be that. I haven't made it all to watch a lot of Noah Gindorf tape out of North Dakota State yet, but that could potentially be one as well too. And look, anybody that gets compared to Heath Miller the way Michael Mayer has, you're automatically inclined to go watch some of his tape and all. It doesn't feel like he's someone that we'll be talking about unless the Steelers play him in another uniform there. So I have focused any tight end study that I have done mostly on guys that could be a blocking tight end in the Steelers system.
Yeah, there's a good mix this year. You got your real good athletes in Kincaid. I think Luke Musgrave, I just did the report on him, really fluid guy that catches the ball well and has done some inline work. Not a great blocker, but he's put his hand in the ground before. Michael Mayer is really well-rounded. Washington can be that blocker, just kind of a little clunky and maybe not quite as freaky as the testing would suggest. Laporta from Iowa is underrated. He could go higher than people think. You got your big small school guys and Zach Kuntz from ODU, the former Penn State transfer, Tucker Kraft from South Dakota State. I know that there's been some fans of Brenton Strange from Penn State. You like Brenton Strange a decent amount, do you, Dave?
Yeah, a little undersized though.
Right.
He kind of got tossed out of the possibility in my mind for the Steelers, much in the way that I tossed Kendrick Green out in the pre-draft process. So not saying it can't happen. It would feel a little to me. I mean, he's a better blocker than obviously Connor Hayward, is, and you could use him into the line stuff. I'm not going to say it's out of the possibility that Steelers draft him, but I mean, 6'3", 7'8". Normally they like those extra tight ends to be, if they're going to play on the end of the line of scrimmage, to be a little bit bigger than that.
Yeah, and he's not super long either. I think he's like 32-inch arms or so.
31, almost
31.
32. Yeah.
Yeah. So
31
that's
7/8, I think.
That's the real issue. If you want to go from Zach,
31 and 8 with him.
31 and 1/8.
Right, with Strange.
Oh my goodness, yeah, just really, really stubby. And so to go from Zach Gentry, who's 6'8", 270 with like 34-inch arms, to a guy that's under 6'4" with 31-inch arms. I mean, Strange is the book on him. Good blocker, finisher, seeks contact, but it's just gonna be a math equation when you're facing a 4-3 defensive end. When you're playing the Bengals or playing some even front, team, it's just gonna be a problem. So I just don't get there on Brenton Strange. But yeah, Payne Durham, I'm a fan of. Had a good Senior Bowl week, well-rounded kind of guy. But there's talent throughout. Will Mallory's going to be, I think, good value in terms of what he can do as a receiver. Wild, you mentioned. Latu from Alabama. So it's a good class. And then, yeah, Gindorf, to me, if the ankle's good, like the best, maybe actually literally the best blocking tight end in this entire class.
I think, and even though I buy a ticket for admission to see Darnell Washington in a Steelers uniform, if we're talking, guys, I think that more realistic you could draft it. They did draft a tight end this year. I think you're looking at Schoonmaker out of Michigan, Durham out of Purdue, maybe in the 7th a Gindorf, and maybe a Josh Weil, but I think some people might have him a little bit over. Some people might have him as a 5th or 6th round guy, but that's where my focus has been with the tight end class.
All right, good deal. Let's go.
Have you watched any of that Kyle Patterson? He's supposedly out of Air Force. He's supposedly a good, a decent blocker, but I think many people have him as an undrafted free agent, and I don't think he ran either at the combine. Yeah,
I mean, I guess there's tape on him. I think he has like 18 career catches. I think he's caught 6 passes the last 2 years. And so you're just trying to get tape on him as a receiver. I guess that was more Air Force run that, I guess, more option type offense? I'm trying to think if they're one of the military academies that do that, like Navy and Army and all of them. But there just is not a lot of like tape out there as him as a receiver. Like literally has caught 6 balls the last 2 years.
Okay.
All right, moving on now to wide receiver. And again, I think you're typically you have the really strong classes at the top. You're going to have a bunch of first round picks this year. To be honest, Dave, I would not be surprised if there are only 1 or 2 first round picks taken at wide receiver. I think there is some depth later on, but it is not a top heavy class.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we kind of came to that conclusion early on, right? With this class. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of different shapes and sizes and fits, however, and I think really where the value is in this is in the 3rd and 4th round overall, especially when it comes to guys that I think the Steelers might be interested in. That being, I mean, they obviously brought in Cedric Tillman out of Tennessee, Jaden Reed out of Michigan State. Mingo is a guy that I really, really think fits with what the Steelers could use. Xavier Hutchinson out of Iowa State was a guy that caught my eye early in this process as a potential fit. They brought in Charlie Jones out of Purdue, more of a 4th or 5th round kind of target there. Trying to think who else.
Jaden Reed came in, right?
Yeah. Bryce Ford Wheaton's another guy that I think people are underrating overall because of some teams going to like him in like the 4th or 5th round, I think, just because of the measurables and the contested catchability and the ability that he would be able to give you on special teams, and then trying to work with him to see how high his ceiling is. There. So when it comes to the Steelers specifically, I think you're looking at guys like Tillman, I think Reed, I think Mingo, Hutchinson, Jones, obviously, because they brought him in, and Bryce Ford Wheaton is another one that I've spent the most time on tape wise.
Yeah, I'm with you on Ford Wheaton. I think I've seen some people mock him 7th round. I mean, who the heck knows? But I think he'll be much higher than that.
Dane Brugler has a 7th round draft grade on him. I'll be surprised if he's still on the board in the 7th round. From what would not be the first height, weight, speed receiver that isn't that good to go higher than he probably should, because some team's going to bet on traits and try to work on his game. And if you can build him up, then you got probably a really good player there with some freaky tools. But I'm with you overall. Yeah, I think Mingo's going to surprise. I think hypothetically, let's say the Pittsburgh had to draft Jonathan Mingo, I think you would have to do so by pick 49. I think by the 3rd round, by pick 80, he's gone, and probably long gone at that point. I think Mingo's going to be a guy that goes earlier than people expect. Yeah, I've seen some comparison to the 49ers receiver. Debo Samuel. And all like that.
Did you feel that on tape? I didn't necessarily in the run game. Like he's not going to be using that one.
I guess build only. Yeah. Okay. More than anything, I've just thrown it out. That's what I've seen as far as people trying to comparison on him.
I just didn't see that. Other people have made that comparison. I just didn't feel like you compare the two.
I think you can move him around in any spot in the offense, and I think that's what's going to really make him attractive to a team like the Steelers. I think Hutchinson's along the same lines as well too with him.
Yeah, I think Hutchinson's a guy that could be like that 4th round type pick, big bodied blocker. Obviously, Tomlin talked to him at the Iowa State Pro Day, so that's a name that I'll watch. And I think Jaden Reed still would make sense. Charlie Jones, some slot type guys. I do wonder though, if they do go receivers, like 4th round is probably a starting point, but they may just hold off after the Robinson deal or take somebody in the 7th round.
Right.
But is there any sleeper in this class? I'm trying to go through the list of names. Is there a guy that I really like late? I don't know if I have that one. I mean, I've talked about Malik Knowles from Kansas State some. I don't know if I have that one great late round sleeper, though.
Yeah, I'm going through the list right now. Nobody's really jumping out at me.
Yeah, so it's the receiver class not as strong as other years, especially at the top.
It feels really middle round laden.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Kind of like deep in the middle, but not strong at the top or probably towards the end. All right, offensive tackle. I think there's talent. It's not as strong as you mentioned earlier as past years. We were getting top 3, top 5, blue chip type left tackles. Skronsky, do you view him as a tackle, view him as a guard? I think he's going to be a guard in the NFL, right or wrong. I think that's where he's going to end up playing. To me, once you get past Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones, Darnell Wright, and I'll give you Anton Harrison from there. There's a drop off. We can talk about Dawan Jones and obviously the boom bust potential with him. But if you're going to get a tackle, if you're Pittsburgh, get one early or basically don't get one at all.
Yeah, I think there's some middle of the round talent there. Bergeron out of Syracuse is an interesting prospect. It feels like a lot of people, because he played both tackle and guard at the Senior Bowl, I believe. I just think it's what teams think of him. The biggest problem I had with Bergeron's tape was his feet.
Okay. Yeah, that probably profiles him as more of a guard in your eyes.
It depends on how much, if you think you can correct that or not. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in his tape. It's just.
What's the best thing about his tape? I've heard, is he a mauler? I didn't watch him.
I like the overall athleticism in him. Okay. I like the demeanor in him. The hand usage isn't bad. I mean, everybody's going to point to that Clemson game, and say, well, he didn't fare all that well against the edge in there. And they're good. Where you'll pick out most of the holes in his game probably is in that game against Clemson.
Gotcha. Okay.
I think he can. I think any team that drafts him should give him every ability to battle for a left tackle spot first and foremost. Here's the downside with him. I think you get a good guard.
Not about downside, if that's what it ends up being.
Right.
But for Pittsburgh, it's probably a little less useful, I suppose.
Anton Harrison, I think the whole scheme aspect, have you seen enough from that,
Yeah, and it's kind of like that with Jalen Duncan, too. I think it's got some tools, but a year away, technically, he's got to work on his stuff. Still got to probably get a bit stronger, fill out his body, but that's the developmental left tackle. I like Wanye Morris from Oklahoma. Tennessee transfer, played right tackle, played both tackle spots, but a lot of right tackle. I think he's athletic and can reach and cut off, backside in the run game. Probably some things to clean up technically too, just, not bending over at the waist and keeping his eyes up. But there's some traits and some things to work with there with Wanye Morris. And he's got really good length, 35-inch arms. So he's not a particularly tall guy, but he's a really long guy for his frame.
Dawan Jones scares the living hell out of me. I've made that clear. I mean, he might end up being the best tackle in this class when it's all said and done. But I think he needs to grow up.
Yeah, but
I think he needs to dedicate himself to being an NFL starting tackle.
I hear that, and I'm with you. But just to give the counter, to play devil's advocate, because the talent is great, and the tape. When I watched his tape, I mean, it was really fun. This dude's he's pretty technically sound.
I've said that all along that he can ball. I mean, he is extremely fun to watch play.
But even pass protection with his punch, how heavy his hands are, not just the classic mauler. I mean, he can, he's got the basketball feet. He's got to work on being able to redirect and against some inside counters. But I mean, his tape, I watch him against Foskey in Notre Dame. He just was killing that battle. So if he becomes the guy, then you've hit a home run. But you're right, there is so much risk you feel like you're taking on there.
Right. I think someone who's going to benefit because of this class is Carter Warren out of Pitt.
I'm with you. I like it.
Beyond, I think Jalen Duncan out of Maryland's another one that's going to benefit because of the weakness of the class. And in other words, in any other draft class, he'd probably be these two of Warren and Duncan would probably be, fifth round or later guys. But because of the class overall, they're going to get bumped up a round or two, I think.
Yeah, that's a fair point overall. One other tackles, I like Joey Fisher from Shepherd, big physical, tough right tackle. Trevor Reed from Louisville's got some traits. Who's the guy that I'm looking for that I wanted to mention?
Did you watch any Dalton Wagner?
I didn't. He's really tall, so you kind of worry about just leverage and being able to get low. The Illinois tackle, how do you say it? Palshevsky, tons of 65 starts, something absurd like that. So that's just kind of interesting on its face. You got a couple of small school guys. How about Jake Witt from Northern Michigan, who's playing basketball and then tight end. He's one of those guys and converted to tackle. So developmental guy, but I think he's going to get drafted there just based off of some of the traits, the potential overall. And I have not watched a ton of his tape, but I think Earl Bostic Jr. from Kansas is a guy that's popped up in my what they look for studies. I think he's got an overall pretty good game.
Feels like he might end up landing at guard, though, I think.
Yeah. He's got the size, I think, to play tackle, but
Okay.
Some of those guys kick inside for sure.
But once again, I'm not enthralled with this tackle class.
Yeah, I hear that. All right, let's see. Interior offensive line. I think it's pretty strong overall. It's hard to find those true guards that you talk about, but there's some really good players there with Steve Avila, Osiris Torrance, Cody Mock, the center class. I think the center class is really, really strong overall. John Michael Schmitz, Joe Tippmann, Stromberg. I'm a big Juice Scruggs fan. I mean, there is going to be some centers to get later in this draft that could start sometime the rookie season.
Obviously, once you get past the Peter Skoronski conversation, which has been had all offseason, run that into the ground. I really like Cody Mock. I just like him. That is a guy that I think, wasn't he the one that said if they told me to punt, I'd punt? Who was that?
I think it was Herbig had said that in his press conference.
That's right.
But Mock and Herbig are kind of the same dude, like just fun-loving but nasty physical guys.
Right. I think that guy's spot in the NFL should be a left guard position overall. And then, if break glass in case of emergency, he could probably fit in at center for you. We've talked about City Sal. When you talk about guards, I think John Gaines, the second out of UCLA, is going to be that middle round guy. Initially, I said, I don't know, maybe third round on this guy. But I've backed off that set. But I think somebody's going to get him a really good guy that's going to get some starts in John Gaines, the second out of UCLA overall. Going to be interesting to see where Voorhees goes in all this due to his injury. Who else in this class have I watched a little bit of? Kirkland out of Washington might go undrafted, but he's an interesting name to kind of watch there. Zavali out of North Carolina State might benefit from this not being an overall great guard class,
Yeah, and he was in for a visit, Pat Meyer, at that pro day. I was reading some more on Zavala. There was a back injury to look at, I think, and it's probably one reason why he came in for a visit, because he was not at the combine. He was one of the biggest snubs, and so I bet you there was some medical homework done on Zavala in that back. But he played up from Fairmont State to NC State and did well. Bradford from LSU, Anthony Bradford, I think is going to be a riser in this process. I'm with you on Voorhees, Gaines. I think McClendon Curtis had a really strong Senior Bowl week. He played tackle in college. I think will be a mauler, big right guard at the NFL. Nick Broker played tackle, then moved to guard his senior season at Ole Miss. I think he'll be a late round guy that could stick in the NFL. With Cody Mock, I'm trying to talk myself into, can this guy be an NFL center? I know it's kind of a big projection there, but he's a little tall. But honestly, he's not much taller than Marquise Pouncey. Like Pouncey was 6'4.5", Mock 6'5", so I think you could make it work there.
Right. I think overall, when you look, guards generally you see them and centers get pushed down a little bit in drafts anyway. But I do think once these guys start coming off the board, they'll come off the board in bunches.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a really good class overall in terms of the tackles that may kick inside, the guards that are actually there, the centers. I mean, Stromberg, Scruggs. I think, how do you say the Michigan's name? Josh. I got to bring Josh in pinch hit to pronounce it. Olawatemi from Michigan, I think is an underrated name in this class. Of course, you got John Michael Schmitz and Tippmann at the top. So,
I got around to watching some Tippmann there. The biggest issue I have with Tippmann is the level of his hands out of the snap. It seems to take him a while sometimes to get those hands. Look, if he gets his hands inside, if he fires off and he gets those hands up right away and gets them into the chest, he's tough to get away from. It's just sometimes he's very inconsistent with his hand usage of shooting off the ball there, and that gets him in trouble and leaning and getting his head out and those kind of things. I thought overall as his anchor, someone had mentioned about his anchor, I think in an email, I didn't find a big issue with that. The biggest thing that I had with him, I think overall, was that hand usage and getting those hands firing out more consistently and using those 32 3/4 arms and 10 3/4 inch hands of his.
How did you think the leverage was overall for being such a tall and a little kind of like high cut? He
can get top heavy. He can lose his balance would probably be the second thing with him.
Okay, fair enough. Did you feel the athleticism though on tape, pulling, moving in space? He feels like a good athlete.
Yeah, he can move. Yeah, if you're in a scheme that likes to pull that center out and get him out on the edge, he can do that without a doubt.
Okay, good deal on that.
And obviously it's a mismatch anyway. But you got a big guy on a defensive back out there in space, but his tape is full of annihilations of that out on the edge.
Good deal. Any other thoughts here with this interior offensive line?
Obviously, like if we're talking center specific, I like John Michael Schmitz. Obviously, Ricky Stromberg out of Arkansas might be the most underrated center in this class, I think.
Okay, I'm with you on that. Excuse me. So I think there's going to be good center value in like the third, fourth round.
Okay.
So any other thoughts here with the offense? I got to mention my fullbacks here briefly, and the North Dakota State kid, Hunter Lipke, I think is a guy that's going to be like the next Kyle Juszczyk and play a decade in the NFL.
Okay.
All right, Dave, that's all I had for the offense. Any final thoughts here in terms of the overall class on the offensive side of the football?
No, and I've been picky and choosy with the tape because, look, I mean, there's only so many hours in a day that you can cram in all this tape watching. So most of it's been centered around positions I think the Steelers will draft and when the guys will be drafted. I mean, I have watched a little of a lot of people, but not a lot of a lot of people.
Yeah, well, it's good to at least get some knowledge of these guys, and then obviously whoever the draft picks are, you just dive in fully on those guys. So I'm with you on the approach. So that's all that I had. Dave, anything else you want to talk about? Any other weekend things you wanted to mention about the list of Steelers free agents? You had the article yesterday. Any guys that may come back to Pittsburgh post draft?
I mean, I think if there's one that you want to circle that's unsigned right now that probably has the greatest chance to return after the draft on a 1-year minimum deal, I think it's Benny Snell Jr. And the list isn't very long. I mean, we'll see obviously what happens with Chris Wormley, but with the additions that this team has made, the only way it was the only way he was going to come back anyway, was on a 1-year deal for the minimum, right around probably the start of camp, along those lines. I think the ship has obviously sailed on most of those guys that were unrestricted free agents that remain unsigned at this point. But if you wanted to circle one, and probably number 2 would potentially be Miles Boykin, but he's got to be looking around right now saying, man, I could probably get that same deal that the Steelers want to give me with another team and have a slightly better chance of making a 53-man roster than I would in Pittsburgh. So I think if there's one guy that you want to think had the best odds of getting signed after the draft, it'd be Benny Snell.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Snell, Boykin are the two, if any, are going to come back. I think Snell's got a good shot. Boykin, we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, I think Watt and, people say Mason Rudolph's going to come back. I guess I can't put it at 0, but I'm still putting it real close to 0. I just don't think he wants to come back. He'll get a chance somewhere. But I know obviously not been a lot of interest in him apparently so far.
It's probably better, and we don't know really what kind of interest, if any, there's been out there, if he's even received offers or anything. His bet, he's obviously probably going to be best served to wait until after the draft, as would teams, and then B, maybe it's in his best interest to wait a little bit longer into the summer to see if any quarterback rooms have an injury or anything like that.
I still thought the Rams would have signed him by now. They have literally one quarterback, and it's the aging Matthew Stafford on the roster. So I think he could still end up there. I think maybe in Green Bay to back up Jordan Love. I could see that as an option, but I just don't see him coming back to Pittsburgh to be that clear-cut, no wiggle room number 3 quarterback.
What about your, real quick, your 8 draft prospects you wish the Steelers would have shown more, and to be clear, public interest in? We don't know for sure because, look, they talked about Zoom meetings today and even more Zoom meetings. Just as far as the 8 prospects you wish you would have heard about the Steelers having more interest in.
Yeah, quick sidebar on that. When Khan talked about Zoom meetings, was that with prospects or just like with the scouting staff in general? Because to my knowledge, you can only get 3 Zoom meetings, but is there something else that I'm not aware of?
I came away wondering if anybody really knows what the role is.
That's probably the best conclusion that you can take away. But he was like referring to prospects whenever he talked about Zoom meetings.
It felt like it.
Correct? Yeah, that was my interpretation of it. So yeah, in terms of the 8 guys, about public interest, because listen, Pittsburgh's done their homework on all these guys, and so you get the occasional surprise, the way that Juju, kind of came out of left field, and Calvin Austin not really expected last year. So you never know until the picks come in. But to rattle off the list there, that one name I just mentioned with Oluwatimi from Michigan, Remington Award winner. I think he's going to just be underrated in this draft. Malik Knowles from Kansas State feels like a good fit in this offense. Late round guy. I thought maybe you get a little bit of buzz on him. Derek Hall from Auburn to me is like the one guy I am really hoping that this is a one big con, one big smokescreen, because there's been nothing on Derek Hall. I think he's a great Steelers fit there in the second round at, say, pick 49. Yaya Diaby from Louisville is like an Alex Highsmith. Chicolo, 3-4 base end in college, going to stand up, had a big year in 2022. And then a bunch of the DBs, DJ Turner, Clark Phillips. Turner can play inside out. Great speed. Phillips, one of the best slot corners in this draft. Cam Smith is versatile from South Carolina. And then Quan Martin is a guy that has that versatility as well. I thought there'd be a lot more of a presence for the Illinois guys, Witherspoon and Martin and Sidney Brown. Not a lot of really interest publicly on any of those names.
All right. That's a good list. And Derek Hall right out of the chute. We were talking about him ahead of that Senior Bowl and all. And I thought he represented himself great there, top to bottom. Yeah,
had a really good week down there. Sets the edge well in the run game. He's not super flashy, bendy rusher, but good power, good size, length. I mean, he's just SEC production. He everything Pittsburgh looks for, and yet they've not publicly done much to look at him. So, any final thoughts here, Dave? If not, we can wrap up and get to some reader emails and close out today's show.
All right, let's get to the email machine here real quick here. Nick Shuley, hypothetically speaking, I know they just traded for Allen Robinson, but if the top corners and tackles are gone in Ohio State, Jackson Smith and Jigba somehow slips to 17, could the Steelers take him? Could they? I mean, I'm not going to sit here and definitively say, no, they wouldn't.
Yeah, I guess you can't rule anything out for whatever it's worth. And I kind of put a little stock in this right now, but Peter King mocked Smith and Jigba to the Steelers today in his mock draft for the whatever it is, Football Morning in America column. So I think he's gone by 17, and I think the interest has pointed this team elsewhere other than wide receiver.
Yeah, that's my feeling overall, but I don't want to definitively say no, they would not take him. But you'd have to wonder why he slipped that far, I think.
For sure.
David Ricards writes in, as always, thank you for Depot and the hard work. Podcast on the site helped me get through the off season. I have a special teams question. What's the origin story for Alex's appreciation for Danny Smith as number one? Number two, what positions on special teams are in need of contributors due to free agent departures? I'm guessing Muse is supposed to be a Spillane replacement. He says, what units positions were filled by Derek Watt, Sims, Boykin, and Snell? I recall Spillane and Snell being coverage guys. Is that all they did? He says, I know Sims was a return man. Boykin was a gunner. What other roles did they fill? Let's see here. Let's start with number one, the origin of the story of Alex's appreciation for Danny Smith. I'll attempt to answer that one. Okay. Alex just I'm with him, but not to the degree of what Alex just loved special teams. That's why his favorite player of Steelers all time is probably Chidi Owamu because of that. Alex just loves watching that special teams tape. He likes pulling out those Easter eggs from there, just everything about it. And I don't think it's more so a love for Danny Smith other than that's Danny Smith's job.
Well, how much time do you guys have? Let me tell the story of Danny
Hopefully
Smith.
Hopefully not much.
Yeah, I'll make this short. No, I love special teams in general, the love there. I mean, listen, I can be critical of Danny Smith. I have been in the past. He's certainly not without his flaws, and his team has had its issues before. But how do you not love the guy? Yinzer, from the area, chews 70 packs of gum at one time. The passion that he has, basically kind of one man banding it on the field so much. And so guys love playing for him. And I love guys that can get guys to buy into that role. I think it's pretty special.
As far as positions, units, and fits and all like that, look, it's generally your core guys are like, inside linebacker types, strong safety types, running back / fullback types are usually your core guys. And you need a good 3 or 4 of those guys that can, play on all four teams. And I think it's a right assessment saying Muse is kind of like a Spillane replacement. Muse is going to be a guy, assuming he sticks, that and stays healthy, going to play probably 300 or more special team snaps for you. When it comes to like wide receivers and stuff, either that guy's usually a return guy or he's a good jammer or gunner. For the most part. What else is in here, Alex? Your running backs like Snell and some of these other guys can be return and coverage type players. Probably not play on all 4 teams. So it depends on the guy, but there's so much mixing and matching when it comes to special teams guys. That's why we pay a lot of attention during, at least I do. Alex gets to see it during training camp. I don't, but during the preseason, I really pay attention to the snaps and where certain guys play on special teams, because I think there's a lot to read into that.
There is. There's certainly a path for those bottom end of the rosters, guys 50 through 53 trying to carve out a role there. I mean, some of this can be interchanged. It's not like if you're one position on special teams, you can't switch to another. If you're the left guard on the punt team, you can play the right guard. It's not like playing offensive line, but yes, Blaine was like the left guard on punts. And so what else is there to replace? There's going to work for Boykin. Can Dan Chisena potentially do that? That's an option. Benny Snell was the left wing or the right wing on punt team. Marcus Allen was the up back. Got to replace the up back. That's something to certainly think about and consider. There's, R1s on kick coverage. There's the blockers on the kick return team. So we could go through all that minutia. But, I think the things I'll look at right now is just some of the punt guys, the up back, and maybe who those gunners are going to be.
Pastor Joe Green, do you think the time has come to change how we draft defensive linemen? This is what I mean. For years, the Steelers have drafted defensive ends and projected them to play outside linebacker. Why? Because there weren't many linebackers that could do what they needed them to do with size that was needed. Maybe now we need to take some large, strong, and athletic edge players and have them bulk up from 270 or 275 to 290 or 295. He says a projection. Yes, the reality is these kind of players seem to be more available in today's game. Guys like Hayward and Tuitt are few and far between. Guys like Keon White, Lucas Van Ness, and Zach Harrison seem to be more common. He says they could even utilize these guys on the edge during their first year before they can add some bulk. All in all, it's still a projection, he says. Oh, and get Keanu Benton for sure. Look, it has been a fight for the Steelers, especially when it comes to the more specific defensive linemen. And we've seen them trade up for a guy like Loudermilk because he fits the measurable standpoint here. And the only rebuttal I will have to say, because you're edge players and have them bulk up, is we just had this long, all offseason, we talked about DeMarvin Leal. We talked about him again this morning. Unless you're okay with taking the guy as is for what you see on tape and playing him as is and fitting around what he does, then aren't you opening yourself up more to a year later sitting here and having another DeMarvin Leal question, unless they do change? And I guess what he's saying is should they change their approach on this? I don't have a definitive answer on this for you, other than saying we're going to have to see, what they do moving forward. But yes, it's right. It's harder to find those 2'9". It's harder to find those 6'5", 6'6", 290 to 305 pound guys coming out of college now, without a doubt. And that's been a struggle for years now when it comes to the Steelers. That's why you end up with the Isaiah Buggs and the Waltons and the some of these other guys that and the Leals and all like that. As far as the edge guys go, normally as more and more teams, and there'll always be the game is shifted now too, where even the Steelers play a lot of, 4-man fronts, right? Kind of thing there. And that's why I think you've seen kind of the height of the outside linebacker types that they get kind of grow a little bit by an inch or two more now, because they've learned how to kind of utilize those 6'4", 259 guys, right?
Yeah. Just to get clarity again on the question, is he talking about changing the profile of a defensive lineman or an edge guy or both? What exactly was he saying?
I think he's kind of mixing them up here. He says, draft defensive ends and projecting them to play outside linebacker. Why? He says, because there weren't many linebackers that could do what they needed to do with size that was needed. Then I guess he goes on to ask, maybe now we need to take some large, strong, athletic edge players. In other words, he's saying now take those edge players and turn them into bulk them up. And look, this goes back to the conversation we had about Lucas Van Ness that makes it so hard with a guy like him. He played more over the B gap than he did out on the edge. So unless you came to me and you said, and look, there's some great tape with him interior. So, I mean, some really good tape with him over the interior. But once again, you're back to, he only played 1,000 snaps, I think, in college on the defensive side of the ball, really over 2 seasons there. Is your projection to play him as is if you were to draft him and at the NFL level and let him play, that over the B gap and on out a little bit, or is your projection for him to play at the edge more and utilize that skill and refine that skill set there? He's just such a hard player to project, especially with the way the Steelers have done things.
I guess the argument is Pittsburgh for years would project the ends to play off ball line or play outside linebacker on their feet. And that was a projection. So why not just do the same projection with the Van Nesses of the world and ask them to bulk up just kind of in the reverse direction? I think it's the idea.
Sure. But we just went through that with Leal, or going through that with Leal, but we don't know what they're going to do with him.
Yeah, that's fair. But I don't want to let Leal necessarily, be the guy that changes the whole strategy or not. What I would say to the question, though, and I think you said everything really well, Dave, is that I think that the type has changed. If you go through the study I just posted today, the Steelers, what they look for in terms of defensive ends, the numbers have shifted. They're smaller, they're lighter, they're faster. Like we actually have changed those benchmarks over time because of guys like DeMarvin Leal. So I think it's actually happening right now, just maybe a bit quieter. Even Loudermilk did not fit perfectly because he did not have great length. And he was that weird 274 where he dropped a bunch of weight for some reason to try to run fast, and he did not run fast. But I would say, I think you're actually seeing some of these things change and shift, and what they look for study reflects
because
that.
Because they can't find those guys.
You can't, anymore. Yeah. Because they used to take the big defensive tackles and just kick them out. But now every defensive tackle in college is 280 pounds and is a 3-tech and plays upfield and rushes the passer. No one plays run defense in college football. So, it's harder to find those guys. You don't have kind of those, as you said, the guys at 6'4" and a half, 300 pounds, 33 plus inch arms. They're very hard to find. That's why I love Benton, because he is kind of like the last of the old school type defensive linemen. Even Brzee and Dexter don't have the length that you would like. So the short answer to the question is, I think actually you've seen that shift begin to happen, and guys like Leal reflect that.
I guess he's wanting to see another shift down to a little bit lighter guys.
Well, how lighter do you want to go? I mean, you can only go so light, I think, before it becomes, really
right.
impossible.
Well, you're in that 270 range,
Yeah. And with Van Ness, I mean, I read some of the comments with some good points, and I think he played heavier at Iowa this year and kind of dropped down to be able to work out well. And, he could play inside. So I think a key on White, though, is a guy that we have to talk about some at 32 if he's there, because while he's a little light, he's not that far off and really seems to check those boxes. Now, as you say, he's kind of played more on the edge, but he's a guy that probably projects at least a bit cleaner to try to bump inside and play, 3-tech 4-eye.
I still think both those guys are better served as defensive ends.
Okay. Fair enough.
In a 4-3. But once again, I want to make it clear, Van Ness has got some great tape inside.
Yeah. But to the question is, how do you find those interior defensive linemen? And how do you find Hayward's replacement if it's not going to be the edge guys?
I think you got to lower your standards. And within that, I think lowering those standards comes from the height standpoint. And then, even then, if you do that, how many of those guys are still going to have the 33-inch arms?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is maybe this team lowering the length standard because it's hard to find the 34-inch arms that Hayward and Tuitt had. So I think when they looked at Brzee and Dexter, they're tall guys, but they don't have the length. They're 32 and a half inches. So I think Pittsburgh kind of sacrificed the length and saying, okay, because we're not going to two gap as much, so we're not going to try to get extension and hold the block. We're going to use just our guys to get upfield and penetrate. Maybe you need a bit less length to do some of those things. I
tell you what, the first thing I look at when I'm putting together, because the Senior Bowl is the first monumental event for me that I really start, learning.
Same. Yeah.
Here is, as soon as those heights and weights, I get them all tabled up and all like that, I go down that son of a gun and I look for 6'5", 6'6", 290 pounds or more. And then I look at the arm length. That's the first thing and should I scout that way? No, but I mean, I got to have a starting point
Sure.
Here, and I have to inside out this because of it. I mean, obviously, if I was a scout, that's not that's not how I would start in the process here. But that's the way I'm forced. But now you go through it, and you automatically go, oh darn, there's not that guy. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah, it's hard. You start searching longer and longer each year. That's why, I was the same way with Benton. I didn't know much about Benton
and the first film I watched was Dexter.
Right. So, I mean, the first thing I saw was, okay, this guy's 6'4", 300 pounds with length and plays at Wisconsin. Okay, I'm going to watch this guy because he might be on that short list of Steelers. And I think at the end of this whole process, he still is.
Right. And obviously, as the process goes on, you're watching more and more people. Let's see. Deshaun Campbell. Sup, guys? My question, I read something about C.J. Stroud scoring low on the S2 test or something like that. What exactly is that? What does it determine? And possibly, do you have what Kenny Pickett may have scored on that test? Also, would you rather give up picks to go up to get a Paris Johnson, or would you keep the draft picks, draft your needs and draft one of these day 2 tackles? And Dave, he says, would love to see you at Latrobe this summer. Make it happen. You're not going to see me at Latrobe. I'm going to get that out there right now. I don't like leaving my house, period. Number 2, I don't know enough about the S2 test to talk about it where it provides value in a discussion just yet. I saw that. I know it's a talking point. It's on my list to drill down, but I got to be honest with you, so many other things, cramming last minute tape and all this other stuff that goes along with the site. I have not given that the attention to talk intelligibly about it.
It's the buzzword S2. That's all you hear when it comes to quarterbacks.
And I haven't even looked what Kenny Pickett's score is. Do you know what it is? Or was
really this only been talked about more so this year. So it really was, to my knowledge, not even referenced last year. I'm guessing it was administered, but I don't know if there was ever really a conversation about that stuff. But it's really overtaken the Wonderlic conversation. Here's my thought on the S2, and it's not. I don't have many thoughts. I'm kind of with you, Dave. Is that it's a thing that most fans and draftniks kind of learned about 8 seconds ago. And now we all have a hard and fast opinion on what it means. It's like we just learned about what this thing was, and now we're trying to determine, what's good, what's bad. And apparently, there's a bunch of variables, and like that's one score of a longer test in terms of that process. So I think it's a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, and that's kind of reflective of the S2. I think people should be careful trying to make hard and fast conclusions based off of this new thing that we're all kind of learning what it's about.
Right. Look, and forever and a day when it comes to this show and the site specifically, we owe it to the readers and listeners to not fake it until, either I'm going to, and I'm open about this. I'm open about my process and all like that. I'm not going to talk about something and pretend like I know everything about it if I don't know a lot about it, and right now I don't know everything that I think I should know about that. So I'm not going to try to apply it and pretend like I know everything about it just to answer a question here.
Yeah, and as of right now, I've only heard it really referenced to the quarterback class, and we're not exactly putting our ear to the quarterback class this year. And so I'd be interested to know those scores for other positions,
Sure.
Corner or safety. I think that'd be interesting. But obviously, Wonderlicks and intelligence scores are all about quarterbacks. And I know the S2 is not really an intelligence score. It's like, what even is the S2 though? Is it like it's a processing and you?
I don't know enough about it.
Taking information. Yeah, so I think people have really kind of gotten over their skis trying to dissect what it is and what it's not.
And when you need a large sample size to be even to compare it to know, I mean, obviously it means something, to somebody. They administered the test for a reason. We just don't know enough about it. Sorry. And maybe this off season I'll dive more into that.
Yeah, we're not going to speak to it too much more.
All right. Hasm writes in, hi, Dave and Alex, had an idea I wanted to float past you. My understanding is that the Rams might be willing to trade Aaron Donald as part of the rebuild. Do you think they would take the 32nd and 49th for Donald? Assuming yes, could you take on his contract if we extended him and or added on voidable years? I'd assume we'd create space by cutting Witherspoon, restructuring Watt. Okay, he wants to go down this road here. I look. I say this now every time. any team can really afford any player that they want. Just what lengths do they want to go to be able to afford that player? Do you want to restructure everybody you possibly can on your roster to create space? Do you want to use void years? All that stuff. So technically, generally, the answer is can a team make this player work via the cap? Yes. It's just at what lengths do you want to go to do that? Now, look, I just pulled up Aaron Donald's contract here. To my understanding, he is due $13.5 million base salary in 2023, another $15 million roster bonus on top of that. So that's $28.5 million. To my understanding, because that roster bonus of $15 million is fully guaranteed, it means the Rams have not paid it yet. So that means if a team were to acquire him, they would be on the hook for it. So you're looking at right out of shoot here, having to afford a $28.5 million initial cap allotment. Now, how much could you get the Rams to eat of that? Blah, blah, blah.
We just saw that with Robinson. They're good at eating money.
Yeah, but I mean, look at the dead money alone that they would have involved with trading him away with proration and all. That's 25 and 16. There's $41 million if they were to trade him before June the 1st. That's a lot of dead money, even if they weren't going to pay any of these salaries here. On top of it, he's 32 years old. So let's say you did find a way to trade for him, got the compensation worked out, and you did have to take on, let's say you even had to take on 20 million of the 20, you got the Rams to eat 8 million, right?
Okay.
What are you going to do with that other 20 million? You're going to have to restructure all that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're and he's got 2 additional void years in there. So you could obviously drive his cap number down much in the same manner, probably that the Steelers did Allen Robinson II there. But even so, this guy, I mean, and look, he could still play, but he is 32, at the answer becomes a question. At what lengths are you willing to go to highly invest in this guy right now? You can always make it work. It's just at what lengths do you want to go, especially moving past 2023, to go get this guy?
Sure. It's a reflection of the thing we always say, the cap is real. It's just very malleable. You can massage the cap however you basically see fit. My tongue was in my cheek when I made that comment about, the Rams eating Robinson money and they could eat Donald money as well. It's not, feasible this year. Next year, perhaps. Maybe my biggest concern with Donald is, he's guys talked about retirement quite a bit. Could he play 1 year and then peace out? And he might be on the hook there. So that might be my biggest fear with any sort of discussion about Aaron Donald is how long do I have this guy for?
Look, we're still, it's Monday. I checked the NFLPA this morning. We're still waiting on what the specifics of the Allen Robinson contract is at this point. We think we know, but we don't completely know yet. That was a lot easier to circumvent around with the $10 million that the Steelers inherited. I mean, with the $5 million in base salary that the Steelers inherited with that there. That was a lot easier to work around, especially when it seems like they were willing to use the void years and give them the bonus of 3.8 whatever million it was with that. It's a larger scale version of that, literally, when you're talking about Aaron Donald.
Just
go ahead.
Just last thought is I don't know the whole contract situation for Donald, but I think maybe next year they got to trade Donald at some point. They're totally rebuilding this thing that would give you a lot of value. Like I can't see Aaron Donald playing out his career for a 5-12 Rams team.
Even his roster bonus right now, because of March, it became in 2024. His $5 million roster bonus has already become guaranteed at this point. Here. So he's set to earn a $10 million base salary in 2024, along with a $5 million roster bonus. And there's another, I don't know what it's tied to. I had to find out, but there's another, I guess, an option bonus in here of 6.6, almost 6.67 million there. So it does indeed feel like, assuming he stays, 2023 might be it for him with the Rams, and then they're going to have to figure out to do something with him. Either he's going to retire or whatever.
What's their dead money next year if they were to deal him next offseason before the roster bonus? I guess.
Assuming another team, assuming all you're dealing with is the prorated stuff, it's $28.5 million as we sit here right now.
Next year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because he's got proration of 12.5 in 2024 and $8 million each in 2025 and 2026, which are void years already. So 16 and 12.5, that's $28.5 million that they're potentially already setting up to be dead.
Okay. Yeah, I think they're going to have to deal him at some point. You just hold on to this guy and get nothing out of him. Not going to help you win if your team's totally rebuilding. So we'll see. That conversation may come up more next year, I guess.
Yeah. All right. I think we've run long enough here, haven't we?
Yeah, we'll come back Wednesday. We'll get our myself and Dave will have our mock drafts up on the site by then. We'll go through the defensive side of the draft class, get our final thoughts there. Lasting impressions on the first round, and then get you ready for a very busy Thursday night.
All right. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex on Twitter at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you like what we do and want to donate to the cause, SteelersDepot.com. Hit the donate button up right navigational bar. Also, if you like an ad-free version of the site, SteelersDepot.com. Hit the ad-free button up right navigational bar and follow the directions that way. Tons of content's going to be on the site from here on for the next 2 weeks for sure. Probably the next 3 weeks as well, too. So we invite you over to SteelersDepot.com and start checking out all the mock drafts and just everything associated with the draft moving forward here. So in the meantime, until Wednesday, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.